today. Um, so we are joined by Dylan Benyon, who is a counseling psychologist and the founder of Cognition and Co, the South African Psychology Student Network. He completed his professional training at the University of Pretoria in 2022 and was recognized as one of the Mail and Guardian's top 200 young South Africans in 2021. Dylan is a passionate advocate for mental health and fostering community growth through transparency and support. Dylan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I don't feel like one of the young South Africans anymore, but hey, that's the problem with aging, hey?
2021 is a while ago, so I completely understand.
Please don't remind me, Lebogang.
Dylan, thank you so much for making the time to join us today and to help us unpack this very heavy topic, especially during this time of the festive season. You know, coping with grief can be quite difficult. So thank you for making the time. So I think just to start us off, Dylan, many people dread the festive season when they're grieving. Why does grief often feel very heavy, especially during this time of the year?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to chat here about this topic, and definitely a pertinent topic now as we start the holiday season. Grief often intensifies around the festive season because this time of year carries an unspoken expectation of togetherness, joy, and this desire, this need, or this want to celebrate this time of year. These expectations can make our internal world feel a little bit out of sync with our external one. And when everyone else appears to be celebrating, it can highlight the absence of the person or the thing that we've lost during this year, perhaps, right? It's not always, grief isn't always one of those things that is, specifically for a person, but it could be a dream that you had that you didn't achieve this year. So the season acts basically as a magnifying glass. All these small reminders, familiar traditions, and even certain foods or songs can stir up memories that deepen the awareness that our life has changed somewhat, and maybe not always what we believe for the good in that moment. It's not that grief suddenly becomes worse. It's just that the environment brings our loss a little bit closer to the surface.
Yeah. And you know what you just mentioned made me realize, Dylan, that during this time of the year, a lot of people are reflecting, they're thinking back to how the year has been. And if someone has lost something during this time, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a job, whether it's a friendship, something, it can be very hard to reflect on and to actually realize that this is now their reality. And it's understandable why it feels much heavier, especially during this time of the year where it's very festive. There's a lot of family, there's a lot of gatherings, but one might feel empty because that one element of their life is no more.
No, you're so right about this being the opportunity, or this time of year is the opportunity to reflect, because we've been working so hard to survive, to get to December. And now all of a sudden, we've got this time to ourselves. And what do? We spend it with, we spend some time reflecting or introspecting. And it's true, it can bring these feelings and these emotions to the surface.
Yeah. The holidays are often filled with traditions and memories. How does grief show up when those memories involve someone we've lost?
Sure. Traditions are quite symbolic, right? If you think about them in their nature, they carry stories, they've got routines, there's emotional meaning behind these things. So when somebody we love is no longer here, those same traditions feel disrupted or somewhat incomplete. Grief can show up in many different forms. It can be a wave of sadness during a familiar ritual, for example, discomfort when, something feels a little bit off, or guilt even. And that's, I think, one of the worst ones. A lot of us feel quite guilty around this time of the year because we know that we should be enjoying this time, but there's things that have happened within the year that are making us feel like we can't necessarily jump in the same way. So, all of these things together, unfortunately, they do compound as well, but they tell us that our traditions have kind of changed or skipped. Sometimes grief shows up as laughter, followed by tears, followed by nostalgia, or there's some heartache involved in there. And yeah, it's a tough time of the year to be dealing with these things when all of our traditions are so at the forefront of what we do over this festive period. Yeah, our grief reflects both the love that we had and the adjustment to the new physical absence that we're experiencing.
You said something quite interesting, Dylan, around some people tend to feel this guilt, especially during this time of the year where the loved one is no more. And they
Mm,
find it quite hard to celebrate or to be with family or to be within gatherings because there's that level of guilt that, but my loved one is not here. Why should I be taking part in such activities? Is it okay for people to opt out of celebrations, right? And how can they do that without feeling guilty?
100%. That's such good self-care, right? It's absolutely okay to step back from celebrations if that's what needs to happen. Grief requires a lot of emotional energy, and sometimes there simply just isn't enough capacity to participate in large gatherings or some of the traditions that we typically used to. People need to be able to communicate these feelings that they might be having with honesty and kindness, right? This saying things like, this is a bit overwhelming for me. I just need like a bit of a quieter space, or, this year I just need to take a step back. I really appreciate your love and your understanding in this, right? It doesn't have to be a thing of negativity to practice self-care and look after yourself during this time. Giving yourself permission here is often the first step towards easing that guilt that you might be feeling.
Yeah. And with grief, I think of grief as such a roller coaster, right? That the stages that you go through for grief aren't really, sort of this is the first step, this is the second step, then that's the third, and that's the fourth, the different stages. It fluctuates. And at times, some people might have gotten to a point where they've accepted the passing of the loved one, but now it is that time of the year where it's festive, celebrations, and now we're no longer accepting of the death of a loved one. Now we're at a point where we're feeling maybe angry or we're feeling guilty, like you mentioned. It's interesting how grief works, where because you've accepted it, it doesn't mean that you'll accept it entirely. There is
Yeah.
still that gap within you that you still long for your loved one, especially during such times of the year.
Mm, mm. I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah.
It really it does bring things to the surface, and unfortunately, it creates a contrast, and it does so with that magnifying glass that I mentioned previously.
Yeah. Some family members, Dylan, aren't really understanding, right? And it's not in a bad way. It's really not in a bad way because they're trying to hold a safe space, for
Yep.
that particular family member who's lost a loved one. They want to still make the environment the same, even without the loved one being there. Some people feel pressure to be happy because it's the festive season. What does that pressure do to someone who is grieving, especially during the festive season?
Yeah, that pressure is a lot, because it's a social norm that we need to provide, or we need to have fun. We need to celebrate. It's that time of the year, right? It's on all the social media messaging at the moment. It's that we're going to have a good time, and it's really really difficult. We need to it's difficult as family members, right? Because not everybody's a trained psychologist. Not everybody's done the SADAG counseling training. Not everybody knows how to contain a situation. So it's one of those things that we as the person grieving need to be able to set our boundaries with regards to this. We need to be able to communicate effectively what it is that we need in that space and not always, push the other people away that are pressuring us, but help them understand the world from our perspective. And oftentimes it's more so about, instead of saying, somebody comes there and says all the wrong words, right? They say everything, you'll get over this, or like time will heal this, and those are somewhat appropriate, but they may not be comforting in that moment. Sometimes just a quiet silence next to the person that's lost somebody is what's needed. That creates that safe space that says, "I'm here for you," and that you don't have to go through this alone.
Sure. I want us to go to that, around what to say, what not to say, right? Especially when you're trying to support someone who's grieving. What advice would you give to people supporting someone who's grieving? What should they say, or should avoid saying to the loved one?
Yeah, like I'm saying there, sometimes it's just presence sometimes rather than answers. Simple statements like, I'm here for you. Take your time. Would you like company? Those are things that can help. And there's no right words. It's the same as that there's no right way to grieve either. You mentioned the roller coaster earlier, and it really is. One day you can be angry, the next day you can be depressed, the next day you can be accepting of this, the next day you can be exceptionally frustrated or guilty. It's really up and down, and that does make it difficult for our loved ones to give that support. Like I said, avoid phrases like everything happens for a reason, or you'll feel better soon, or time will heal this, because unfortunately, they can unintentionally invalidate the grief that you're feeling. Instead, sometimes just sitting with someone, whether in silence or in a conversation, that's what creates that safe emotional space that I speak of. The most powerful message I think you can offer is that you don't have to carry this alone.
Yeah, yeah, and holding that safe space and creating that safe environment for them during that time is very important. I like what you said there, that we should rather hold the safe space, and the presence of us being there could actually have a huge impact where the person does not feel alone, that you're there with them, and the little words as far as I am here for you, I am here to support you, we will figure this out together. I think those are very gentle ways, where we can try to create that safe space for loved ones, and make sure we create that safe environment for them. Now, for those
Yeah,
who,
indeed.
want to honor their loved ones during the festive season, what are some of the ways that they can do that without deepening their pain?
Yeah, when it comes to that again, it's one of those situations where, you want to be able to have these conversations. You want to be able to open up to these people, or you want them to open up to you. But not everybody is trained to handle the discomfort that comes from dealing with grief and loss. Even as psychologists, it's something that is taught to us, but it really takes time and practice and CPD points to be able to get somebody to that point, right? But the fundamental thing that I practice when I work with grief is that it's the relationship that you develop with that person that is the most important part. That's the corrective experience that feels healing to that person. So that would be my advice there, right? Create that space, build that rapport, even if it's feeling uncomfortable for you. That's really what you can do to help that person that is struggling just feel a little bit better about the
Yeah,
situation that they're in. And do your best to obviously be aware of times that you're applying pressure, maybe unbeknownst to you. We often talk about, don't fall victim to peer pressure, but we also need to, promote the other side of don't peer pressure your friends, right? And in the same situation here, don't pressure somebody to deal with this thing quicker than what they have to. They're going through a journey that only they can walk, and because of the individual nature of this. So walk with them if you can. Carry some of the weight when you can. Show them that you may know, or you have felt in the past what it feels like to be in their shoes, and I tell you that can really be the saving grace here.
yeah. It's creating that safe space for them, and also understanding that we don't grieve, we don't go through the processes the same way. We might have lost a loved one together, but our processes are different. And it's very important
100%.
that they acknowledge that. Now, for those who are feeling very alone, Dylan, during this time of the year, what small steps can help them feel less isolated?
Sure. Um, Loneliness during grief is incredibly common, especially when everyone seems very occupied at this time of the year with family and celebration and all the other things. Small steps can make a meaningful difference here. Reaching out to one person instead of many, or joining an online or an in-person support group, through SADAG perhaps might be very beneficial to some people. Attending community or even spiritual gatherings can be beneficial to them, or even just spending time in a cafe or a public place where you can be around others without even having to interact properly, right? I also recommend that anybody that is struggling with something like this practice things like journaling, for example, where you write down or, write down your feelings, whether positive or negative. And, as you continue doing that, you can page back and see where you were and you can see the growth that you might be experiencing as well. I also really, one of the things I practice is just connecting with nature at this time of the year. My wife and I, when we go down to the coast for Christmas now, we will go for hikes, and I find that just so rewarding for my soul. Not that I'm grieving anything right now, but it's good. It's good practice for everybody. What matters is finding your moments of connection, even if they're simple or brief, just to remind yourself that you don't have to move through grief entirely alone.
Mm, yeah. And I love the tips that you shared, right? They're quite practical. And people might think that they're little things, they're not going to change, but the little that we do actually can make a difference. Taking a walk, spending some time journaling, and being outdoors with other people, as much as it's very hard, but it's important that we don't isolate, during this time, to just
Mm.
be surrounded by other people. So thank you so much for sharing those steps with us. Now, how can people manage difficult moments, right? Like family gatherings or questions about losses. And with family gatherings, I'll speak for my family. It's a very big family. And you have to constantly tell one person the same thing over and over and over again, or even different people. How can people manage difficult moments, like family gatherings or questions about loss? How can they manage those?
Sure. Yeah, like I've said already, grieving is an exceptionally emotionally heavy exercise to do, right? So planning ahead, I think here is one of the biggest things you can do to reduce the emotional load. Think about what you're comfortable sharing if you're dealing with difficult questions, for example, or the difficult moments as well. You can think about what you're comfortable opening up about. Essentially, what I'm saying is that where are your boundaries with regards to this? Planning ahead helps you set those boundaries so that you don't get pushed past them on a day-to-day or moment-to-moment basis, especially this time of the year when we have our families around and this person's asking questions about another person, or a sister is asking about an ex or something like that, or a loved one that we've lost, and you know that you're going to be dealing with these things. So as these difficult questions arise, you can respond. Essentially, you can respond in any way that you feel comfortable, right? That's within your boundaries. But I typically like to encourage brief and honest statements. Things like, "I appreciate your care. I'm just not able to talk about this right now." I think is such a great one because it tells you exactly where that boundary is. And if that person keeps pushing, you know that you've got to withdraw a little bit, right? It's okay to take breaks, to step outside, find a quiet room, take a moment to breathe, reset a little bit. Giving yourself permission to leave an event early or adjust your expectations can really protect your well-being in this regard. You're allowed to move at your own emotional pace, right? We spoke about this roller coaster, and that roller coaster of grief is not the same for anybody, right? So when you're surrounded by others, take the opportunity to move at your own pace, right? No one else is on the roller coaster with you. They might join for parts, right? But you've got to get through to the end of it, and it's okay to distance yourself emotionally or physically if you have to at this time of the year.
What I'm taking out of what you just said, Dylan, is boundaries. Boundaries are of so much importance, especially during family gatherings, where people want to know more, about what's happening in your life since the passing of your loved one, but you're not even ready, to share such information. And it's important that you communicate that, right? It's important that we learn how to communicate our emotions with family or with friends, right? And some it's hard because they don't understand grief. And I like what you said to say, speak it out, say it as it is, be firm in what you're saying, because
Mm.
at the end of the day, we need to protect you, right? You need to protect yourself. And if it does
No,
get
you.
overwhelming, I like what you said, that take some time out, be alone in that room, go outside for a walk, sort of calm down and come back when you're ready. It's very, very important for people to understand that grief is different, and it's okay to take your time during grief, to not feel pressured during that time.
100%, it's something that I've been trying to practice in my own life. I'm somebody that typically says yes a lot. And I find that it burns me out because so often I've said yes to babysitting my sister's kids, for example, but I forget that I've got other things on the go, right? My brain's working at 100 miles an hour and sometimes things slip through. So, this festive season, if you are sitting and dealing with some grief, I would say practice saying no first, right? And then if things change, you can change your mind later so that you don't find yourself, completely caught up in a million things because everybody's going to be inviting you out. Everybody's going to be inviting you to do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes you need to protect yourself first by saying no. And then if things change, if you develop the emotional capacity, you then say, okay, I've changed my mind. I would love to come and spend some time with you guys. And in doing so, you've then set your boundaries and you know that you're ready to handle that. If somebody pushes you within that space, that's okay. We'll deal with it as the moments come. But that gives you the opportunity to kind of pull back a little bit, right? We don't want to socially like isolate ourselves completely over this time because it's very easy to do that as well. But we want to find a healthy balance here, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's important to have that balance in place, right? So that you can also see where are you? Would you like to go out with your friends or with family, or actually you'd like to rather spend some time alone? And it's important to have that balance where you're not spending too much time alone because now you're isolating, but rather try to engage and be with loved ones, especially during this time. If grief feels like it's becoming too much to carry alone, when is a time to seek professional support?
Yeah, such a lovely question. I think every single time I do one of these talks, there's always a question like that that says, we can deal with so much in our lives, right? We're South Africans, we're resilient, beyond all measure. But sometimes things do become too much. Now, if someone feels persistently overwhelmed or unable to function in their daily life, even just feeling emotionally stuck, like there's no movement, it may be time then to reach out for some support. It doesn't mean that you're a broken human being that needs to be glued back together. It just means that you're struggling to cope with this thing and you don't yet have the strength or skills to handle that. So why not come to a professional that can then teach you those skills, that can walk along with you, right? Your family and your friends are going to be quite biased towards you and they're going to be supportive to the nth degree. But sometimes we need to challenge those types of things, right? So a professional can help you, also learn to be vulnerable in those spaces. When grief brings up things like intense anxiety or prolonged depression or just any complicated feeling that might feel unmanageable at this stage. So therapy with a psychologist or a registered counselor or phoning the SADAG call lines as well could be very, very beneficial. These provide a private and compassionate space where grief can be unpacked, and there's no judgment in that space, right? I know when I've been to therapy before for grief, it's felt embarrassing in the beginning, but I always leave feeling, thank goodness this person didn't laugh at me having a cry, because I've lost someone close to me. And that's not we want a corrective experience here, right? And that's what therapy, that's what calling SADAG, that's what these things can do. Seeking support is not a sign of weakness. It's a step towards giving yourself the care that you deserve.
Yeah. It's very important for us to have such conversations, especially during the festive season. I'm highlighting this a lot because it's a very hard season for a lot of people. And some people see the need to carry so many things by themselves, and not reach out for help. And thank you for sharing that with us to say, listen, when you feel like this is too much for you to carry by yourself, seek that help, seek professional support, whether it's with a psychologist, whether it is calling SADAG for additional support and resources. And I want to remind all of our viewers that our lines are available 24/7. When you are going through a hard time, when you are struggling, we are here to support you as best as we can. You don't have to go through this by yourself. Now, Dylan, what reassurance would you give to someone who feels like they're not grieving the right way during this festive season?
The first thing I want to say is that there's no right way to grieve, right? There's no correct timeline. There's no expected emotional expression. There's no right way to grieve. That's why there are still papers being published to this day on, the the different routes through grieving. Is it intuitive? Is it instrumental? Is it a five-stage process? We're constantly learning more about these things, and it's very much individual. Your process is shaped by your relationships, your personality, your memories, your current emotional capacity, and that's individual because that's what makes you who you are. Some days you may feel okay, other days you might feel a little bit overwhelmed, right? This variability doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It just means that you're human. Grief is not a performance to be perfected in any way. It's an experience to be lived through. You are allowed to grieve in the way that makes the most sense to you, is what I want to say to anybody that is dealing with this at the moment.
Sure. There is no right way to grieve, and it's important for people to understand that, right? That is, as much as there are stages in place, it doesn't mean that we have to follow through with that. Take your time, do what feels right to you. I like what you say. Do what feels right to you, what feels like it's okay for you to do, especially during this time, because it is different for everyone. You know, we might be going through the same thing, like I mentioned, but our grieving processes are all different. Dylan, as we wrap up, what is your one message of hope that you'd want to give to individuals that are grieving during this time, to hear as they head into the holiday season?
Yeah, sure, sure. We essentially what I want to leave you with is that you're not walking the season alone, right? Even if it does feel that way a little bit from time to time. Your grief is by no means a burden. It does not make you any less deserving of kindness, rest, or connection, right? Even celebration. Take each moment as it comes. Soften where you can and be as gentle with yourself where you when you cannot, right? The holidays may feel a little bit different this year, and that's completely okay. Grief is actually an expression of love, and your love is allowed to take up space.
Sure, Dylan, that was so heartwarming. I got goosebumps from that. Thank you so much, Dylan. We truly do appreciate you making the time today. And to all of our viewers, to everyone that's watching, if you know of someone that's going through grief during this time of the year, please do reach out to them. Hold that safe space for them, like Dylan mentioned, right? Be there with them. Remember the tips that we shared during the session. You know, reach out, be their safe space. And if you don't know how to support a family member or loved one, please do call SADAG. We are available to help. We are available to support and to guide you during this time. And if you're going through a hard time during this festive season, please do reach out for help as we are here for you and you don't have to go through this by yourself. Dylan, thank you so much for making the time. We truly do appreciate it. And we do hope that we will still have these conversations, even more conversations in the next year. But we truly do appreciate you making the time.
No, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone at SADAG, from the very tops to the counselors to everybody for the work that they do. It's absolutely incredible that we have a resource like this in South Africa, and I'm so appreciative to be invited and asked onto these platforms to have these very impactful and meaningful conversations. Yeah, I just wish everybody that is dealing with grief over the festive season all the best. And if you do need help, please use the resources we've been discussing here today. Thank you so much, Lebogang, for the fantastic interview, and I'm grateful for you as well. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you so much to all of our viewers. Thank you all for joining us today. We do hope that you've learned a thing or two, and we hope to see you next time. See you all. Bye bye.